My son passed away, and my daughter-in-law kicked me out. Pack your bags and learn to survive on the streets. I lived 2 weeks as a beggar. At the will reading, she mocked me. Having fun living with the dogs? Then, when the lawyer read my estate, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Bernice, and at 63 years old, I never imagined I would be burying my only child. Thomas was 38 when that drunk driver took him from me on a rainy Tuesday night. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m., and the moment I heard the officer's voice, I knew my world had shattered into a million pieces that could never be put back together. The funeral home smelled like lilies and disinfectant. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, watching people I barely knew file past Thomas's casket. My son looked peaceful, almost like he was sleeping, but the reality pressed down on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. This was it. This was goodbye forever. Romy, my daughter-in-law, stood beside me in a black dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. She had been married to Thomas for 5 years, and in all that time, I had tried so hard to make her feel welcome in our family. I cooked her favorite meals when they visited, remembered her birthday, even helped them with their mortgage payments when Thomas was between jobs. I thought we had built something resembling a relationship, even if it was sometimes strained. But grief does strange things to people. After the service, as people began to leave, Romy turned to me with eyes that were dry and cold. "This is your fault," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "If you hadn't stressed him out so much with your constant worrying, maybe he wouldn't have been driving so recklessly." I felt like she had slapped me. "Romy, please. We're both hurting right now." "No, Bernice. You don't get to play the grieving mother. You smothered him his entire life. He told me how exhausted he was from always having to take care of you, always having to worry about your feelings." Each word hit me like a physical blow. Thomas had said that about me? My quiet, gentle son who called me every Sunday, who brought me soup when I was sick. The drive back to the house we all shared was silent. Thomas had moved back in with me 2 years ago, when his job downtown made the commute easier, and Romy had followed reluctantly. She never liked the arrangement, always making little comments about how cramped it was, how old-fashioned my decorating was. But it was my house, the house where I had raised Thomas after his father left when he was 12. That evening, as I sat in Thomas's childhood bedroom touching his old baseball trophies, Romy appeared in the doorway. Her expression had changed from cold to something darker, more determined. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "This living situation isn't working anymore." I looked up at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you need to find somewhere else to live. This house holds too many bad memories now, and I need space to grieve without you hovering around, reminding me of everything that went wrong." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting. "Romy, this is my house. I've lived here for 26 years. Thomas grew up here." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your house? Bernice. Thomas has been paying the mortgage for the last 2 years. He's been taking care of the utilities, the repairs, everything. This house belongs to him now, which means it belongs to me." My heart started beating faster. "That's not true. Yes, he helped with expenses, but the deed is still in my name. I can show you the papers." "What papers?" she asked, and something in her tone made my blood run cold, because I couldn't find any papers like that when I was going through Thomas's files. The implication hung in the air between us. I rushed to my bedroom and pulled out the metal box where I kept all my important documents. With shaking hands, I rifled through birth certificates, insurance policies, tax returns. The deed wasn't there. My mortgage papers weren't there either. "Looking for these?" Romy stood behind me, holding a stack of papers. "I found them in Thomas's desk drawer. It looks like he had them transferred to his name last year. Something about making sure you were taken care of if anything happened to him." I reached for the papers, but she pulled them back. "The way I see it, you have 2 choices. You can fight me on this, drag us both through a long legal battle that will cost money neither of us has, or you can accept reality and find somewhere else to live." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore." She walked toward the door, then turned back. "I want you out by Friday. That gives you 3 days to figure it out." I spent those 3 days in a haze, calling legal aid offices that couldn't see me for weeks, trying to reach distant relatives who didn't return my calls. The few friends I had were either dead or in nursing homes themselves. Thomas had been my whole world, and without him, I realized how completely alone I was. On Friday morning, I packed what I could fit into 2 old suitcases and a shopping bag. 40 years of life reduced to whatever I could carry. Romy watched from the kitchen window as I struggled down the front steps with my belongings, but she didn't come out to help. She didn't even open the door to say goodbye. As I stood on the sidewalk looking back at the only home I had known for decades, I felt something inside me break that was separate from losing Thomas. This was different. This was the realization that the person I had tried so hard to love and welcome into my family had been planning this moment, waiting for her chance to discard me like garbage. I had nowhere to go and less than $400 in my checking account. At 63, I was about to learn what it meant to be truly invisible in this world. The first night on the streets taught me things I never wanted to know about human nature. I found a bench in Riverside Park, the same park where I used to push Thomas on the swings when he was little. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now homeless, in the place where some of my happiest memories had been made. I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow could hide someone who might hurt me. I clutched my purse against my chest and tried to make myself as small as possible. When the sun finally came up, I felt like I had aged 10 years in one night. The public restroom in the park became my morning routine. I would splash water on my face, try to fix my hair, and attempt to look presentable enough that people wouldn't immediately cross the street when they saw me coming. But it was impossible to hide what I was becoming. After just 3 days, my clothes started to smell. My hair became greasy and tangled. The careful makeup routine I had maintained for decades was reduced to whatever I could do with my fingers and a compact mirror. I tried the homeless shelter on Oak Street, but there was a waiting list. The social worker, a tired-looking woman about my daughter-in-law's age, looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "We're full up, honey. Try back next week, but I can't promise anything. There are a lot of people in your situation right now." My situation, as if being thrown out by your dead son's wife was a common occurrence. I learned to be strategic about food. Fast food restaurants would sometimes let me sit for hours if I bought a small coffee. I discovered which grocery stores threw away perfectly good produce and when they put it in the dumpsters. I had never imagined that at my age, I would be eating day-old donuts from behind a Dunkin' Donuts. But hunger makes you do things you never thought possible. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort. It was the way people looked at me, or more accurately, the way they looked through me. I had become invisible. Just another homeless person that decent society preferred to pretend didn't exist. Mothers pulled their children closer when I walked by. Business owners would suddenly find reasons to step outside and watch me until I moved along. 2 weeks into my new reality, I was sitting on my usual bench feeding crackers to the pigeons when I heard a familiar laugh. My heart stopped. Romy was walking through the park with a woman I didn't recognize, both of them carrying shopping bags from expensive stores. I tried to make myself smaller, to sink into the bench and disappear, but it was too late. She had seen me. "Well, well, well," Romy called out, walking over with her friend in tow. "Look what we have here." I kept my eyes down, focusing on the pigeons pecking at crumbs around my feet. Maybe if I didn't acknowledge her, she would just keep walking. "Bernice," she said louder, "don't pretend you can't hear me." I looked up slowly. Romy was wearing a new coat, something that looked like it cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Her friend stood slightly behind her, clearly uncomfortable but unable to look away from the spectacle. "Having fun living with the dogs?" Romy asked, gesturing at the pigeons. Her friend giggled nervously. "Please," I whispered, "just leave me alone." "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I embarrassing you?" She pulled out her phone. "Smile, Bernice. I want to get a picture of how well you're doing on your own." I stood up quickly, gathering my bags, but she followed me. "Come on, don't be shy. I bet Thomas would love to see how independent his mother has become." The cruelty in her voice broke something inside me. "Don't you dare use my son's name like that." "Your son?" She laughed again. "Your son told me he couldn't wait to get you into a nursing home. He said you were becoming a burden he couldn't handle anymore." I wanted to tell her she was lying, that Thomas would never say such things about me. But standing there in my dirty clothes, smelling like someone who hadn't had a proper shower in 2 weeks, I couldn't find the strength to fight back. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe Thomas really had been planning to put me away somewhere. The funeral director called yesterday. Romy continued casually. Something about Thomas's will. Apparently there's going to be a reading next week. I suppose you'll want to be there, even though I can't imagine he left you anything significant. She dropped a business card at my feet. The appointment is Thursday at 2 o'clock. Try to clean yourself up before then. I don't want people thinking I didn't take good care of my poor mother-in-law. As she walked away with her friend, I heard them talking. God, can you believe she let herself go like that? The friend said. How embarrassing. I know, Romy replied. Some people just don't have any self-respect. I picked up the business card with trembling fingers. Hoffman and Associates, attorneys at law. Thomas had made a will. In all the chaos and grief, it hadn't even occurred to me that there might be legal matters to settle. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. Maybe Thomas had left me something. Maybe he had made provisions for me that Romy didn't know about. Maybe, despite what she claimed, my son had still loved me at the end. I looked down at my reflection in a puddle at my feet. A haggard old woman stared back at me. Someone I barely recognized. But Thursday was only 5 days away. I had 5 days to find a way to make myself presentable enough to sit in a lawyer's office and hear my son's final words to me. I had no idea that those final words would change everything. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I had spent the previous 4 days trying to make myself presentable with the limited resources available to me. The public library had become my salvation. Not only did it have clean restrooms where I could wash up properly, but the librarian, Mrs. Chen, had quietly slipped me a small bottle of shampoo and a bar of soap. For the reading room, she had said with a knowing look. We like our patrons to be comfortable. I had managed to wash my hair in the sink and use paper towels to scrub away 2 weeks of street grime. My clothes were still wrinkled and carried the smell of park benches and uncertainty, but they were the cleanest I could manage. I had even found a small mirror and applied what was left of my old lipstick, trying to resurrect some semblance of the woman I used to be. The law office of Hoffman and Associates was in a downtown building that made me feel even smaller and more out of place. The marble floors reflected fluorescent lights that seemed harsh after weeks of living by street lamps and sunrise. I sat in the waiting area, my hands folded in my lap, trying not to touch anything that might show how dirty I still felt underneath my attempts at cleaning up. Romy arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She had her hair done and her nails perfectly manicured. When she saw me sitting there, she didn't even try to hide her disgust. Jesus, Bernice, I told you to clean yourself up. She sat down 2 chairs away from me as if poverty might be contagious. You smell like a garbage dump. I said nothing. I had learned over the past 2 weeks that sometimes silence was the only dignity I had left. A young receptionist called us into a conference room where Mr. Hoffman, a distinguished man in his 60s, was arranging papers on a polished wooden table. He nodded politely at both of us as we took our seats. Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Hartwell, he said, using Romy's maiden name that she had hyphenated after marriage. Thank you both for coming. I'm sorry for your loss. Romy dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed they were completely dry. It's been so difficult, she said in a voice I didn't recognize, soft and vulnerable. Thomas was everything to me. I'm sure he was. Mr. Hoffman opened a manila folder. Now, let's proceed with the reading of Thomas Michael Hartwell's last will and testament. I held my breath. In the past 2 weeks, I had imagined every possible scenario. Maybe Thomas had left me a small nest egg. Maybe he had made arrangements for me to stay in the house. Maybe, despite everything Romy had said, he had still been thinking of his mother at the end. Thomas's estate is relatively straightforward, Mr. Hoffman began. His primary assets include his 2019 Honda Civic, valued at approximately $18,000, his checking account with a balance of $3,200, and his 401k retirement account with a balance of $47,000. Romy leaned forward, already calculating. However, Mr. Hoffman continued. Thomas also had significant debts. Credit card balances totaling $22,000, an outstanding personal loan for $15,000, and medical bills from his emergency room visit last year totaling $8,000. I watched Romy's face change as the numbers sank in. She had been expecting a windfall, but the math was simple. Even after selling everything Thomas owned, she would barely break even. "So, what does that mean?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "It means that after settling all debts and funeral expenses, there's very little left to distribute. The car will likely need to be sold to cover the outstanding obligations." Romy stared at the papers in front of her. "But what about the house? Thomas owned the house." Mr. Hoffman looked confused. "What house is that, Mrs. Thompson?" "The house on Maple Street. Thomas inherited it from his mother." She shot a venomous look at me. "She's been living there as a tenant, but the property belongs to Thomas." "I'm afraid I don't have any record of real estate holdings in Thomas's name," Mr. Hoffman said carefully. "Are you certain about this?" For the first time since entering the office, I spoke. "Because the house doesn't belong to Thomas. It belongs to me." Romy turned to stare at me, her mouth slightly open. "That's impossible. I saw the papers." "You saw papers," I said quietly, "but you didn't see the deed." Mr. Hoffman cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should clarify this matter. Mrs. Hartwell, do you have documentation regarding this property?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I had been carrying for 2 weeks. "The deed is right here. The house on Maple Street has been in my name since 1987. It's been paid off for 8 years. Romy grabbed the papers from my hands, scanning them frantically. I watched her face go from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. "This can't be right," she said. "Thomas told me he owned the house. He said he had it transferred to his name for tax purposes." "Thomas lied to you," I said simply. "Or maybe you misunderstood what he was saying. He helped with utilities and maintenance, but he never owned the property." "But I saw mortgage papers in his desk. Those were copies of the original mortgage, which I paid off in 2015. Thomas kept them for his own records because he was helping me with some refinancing paperwork a few years ago." Mr. Hoffman examined the deed carefully. "This appears to be legitimate. Mrs. Hartwell, you are indeed the sole owner of 247 Maple Street." I had never seen Romy look so completely stunned. For 2 weeks, I had believed her lies about Thomas wanting me gone, about him being tired of taking care of me. I had accepted her cruelty because I thought she had the legal right to throw me out of my own home. "There's something else," I said, pulling out another document. "Thomas never paid the mortgage. I've been paying it myself all along, from my own savings account." "Your savings account?" Romy's voice cracked. "What savings account? You told us you were living on Social Security." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing her clearly for the first time since Thomas died. "I never told you I was living on Social Security. You assumed I was, and I never corrected you." The truth was starting to dawn on her, and I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. "If you own the house and you've been paying all the bills, then you've been living in my home as my guest for the past 5 years, I finished. "A guest who just threw her hostess out onto the street." Mr. Hoffman was looking between us with growing interest. "Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps you should consult with your own attorney about this situation." "Oh, I already have," I said calmly. "You see, I've had quite a bit of time to think over the past 2 weeks. Time to remember things I had forgotten. Time to make some phone calls from the library." Romy was staring at me like she had never seen me before. "What are you talking about?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I'm talking about the fact that my son left basically nothing behind, which means you have no claim to anything of value. But I, on the other hand, have several things you might find interesting." I pulled out one more piece of paper. "This is an eviction notice, properly filed with the court. You have 30 days to vacate my property." The color drained from Romy's face completely. "You can't do this. Thomas wouldn't want this." "Thomas is dead," I said, and saying it out loud didn't hurt quite as much as it had 2 weeks ago. "And I'm very much alive, despite your best efforts to destroy me." She opened her mouth to say something else, but no words came out. For the first time since I had known her, Romy was completely speechless. And I was just getting started. The silence in Mr. Hoffman's office stretched on until I thought Romy might actually faint. She was gripping the edge of the conference table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, staring at the eviction notice like it was written in a foreign language. This is impossible, she whispered finally. You're just a poor old woman living on Social Security. Thomas told me you couldn't even afford your own groceries. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Thomas told you a lot of things that weren't true, it seems. Or perhaps he never really knew the truth himself. Mr. Hoffman was watching our exchange with professional interest, but I could see curiosity in his eyes. Mrs. Hartwell, would you like me to review any additional documents? Actually, yes. I slid the envelope across the table to him. I think it's time everyone understood the complete picture. Romy tried to grab the envelope, but Mr. Hoffman was faster. He opened it carefully and began examining the contents. I watched his eyebrows rise higher with each page he turned. Mrs. Hartwell, he said slowly, these appear to be property deeds. 7 of them, to be exact, I confirmed. The house on Maple Street where Romy has been living rent-free is actually the smallest of my holdings. Your holdings? Romy's voice came out as a squeak. What holdings? Mr. Hoffman was studying a particular document with intense concentration. This is a deed for a commercial property downtown. The Riverside Shopping Plaza? I've owned that for 12 years, I said calmly. The rental income has been quite substantial. Romy looked like she was having trouble breathing. Rental income? What rental income? From the shopping plaza, the 3 apartment buildings in the historic district, the duplex on Cherry Street, and the warehouse property by the river. Oh, and there's also the vacation rental cabin up in the mountains. Mr. Hoffman set the papers down and looked at me with something approaching amazement. Mrs. Hartwell, based on these documents and current market values, you appear to be worth several $1 million. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Romy made a strangled sound and put her head in her hands. But that's impossible, she said, her voice muffled. You live like, you dress like. Thomas said you needed help with money. Thomas said a lot of things, I repeated. He said those things because I let him believe them, because I wanted him to feel needed, to feel like he was taking care of his mother. I wanted him to have purpose and pride. I had spent 2 weeks on the streets thinking about this, remembering conversations with my son that I had interpreted one way at the time, but now understood differently. When Thomas moved back in with me 2 years ago, he was embarrassed about it. He was 36 years old and moving back into his childhood bedroom because his apartment lease fell through and he couldn't find anything affordable. He felt like a failure. Romy lifted her head, mascara smudged around her eyes. So I let him pay the utilities and grocery bills. I let him think he was contributing significantly to the household. When he wanted to help with what he thought was my mortgage payment, I let him transfer money to an account I set up specifically for that purpose. What account? She whispered. A savings account in his name that I opened and funded myself. Every dollar Thomas thought he was contributing to my mortgage went into that account. I was going to give it back to him as a down payment when he was ready to buy his own place. Mr. Hoffman was looking through more papers. There's also documentation here for several investment accounts, CDs, and what appears to be a stock portfolio. My late husband was very good with investments, I explained. He started building our portfolio when Thomas was a baby. After he passed away 15 years ago, I continued following his strategy. I've been quite successful. Romy was staring at me like I was an alien. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were poor? Because money changes people, I said simply. I've seen it happen in families before. Children start seeing their parents as bank accounts instead of people. They stop visiting out of love and start visiting out of expectation. But Thomas loved you. Yes, he did, and I wanted to keep it that way. I wanted him to call me every Sunday because he missed talking to his mother, not because he was worried about his inheritance. I wanted him to invite me to dinner because he enjoyed my company, not because he felt obligated to take care of the family money source. I had been thinking about this for weeks, about all the small ways I had maintained the illusion of being the poor widow who needed taking care of. Shopping at thrift stores when Thomas was with me, clipping coupons, complaining about the cost of utilities. It had become such a habit that I had almost forgotten it was an act. The irony, I continued, is that Thomas never needed to work as hard as he did. He never needed to stress about money or take jobs he hated. I could have made his life so much easier, but I thought I was protecting our relationship by letting him feel independent. Romy was crying now, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of rage and frustration. You let me throw you out of your own house. You let me humiliate you. Yes, I did. Why? I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about those 2 weeks on the street, about the hunger and the fear and the way people looked through me like I didn't exist. Because I needed to see who you really were, I said finally. I needed to understand what kind of person I had been welcoming into my family for 5 years. And now I know. I stood up, gathering my papers. Mr. Hoffman, thank you for your time. I believe Mrs. Thompson understands her situation now. Romy jumped up as I headed for the door. Bernice, wait. We need to talk about this. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. You can't just throw me out. I stopped and turned around. Can't I? You seemed to think it was perfectly reasonable when you thought I was a poor old woman with nowhere to go. But I didn't know. You didn't know I was rich, so it was okay to abuse me? If I had been genuinely poor and helpless, it would have been acceptable to throw me onto the streets to fend for myself? She opened and closed her mouth several times, but no sound came out. The eviction stands, I said. You have 30 days. As I walked out of the law office and into the gray afternoon, I realized that for the first time in 2 weeks, I wasn't afraid of where I was going to sleep that night. I was going home. Going home should have felt triumphant, but as I stood on the sidewalk in front of 247 Maple Street, all I felt was exhausted. The house looked exactly the same as it had 3 weeks ago when Romy had forced me to leave with nothing but 2 suitcases. The roses I had planted along the front walkway were blooming, the lawn was neatly mowed, and everything appeared normal from the outside. I used my key, the key I had never given up, though Romy probably assumed I had lost it somewhere during my weeks on the street. The lock turned easily, and I stepped into my own home for the first time since my son's funeral. The smell hit me first. Romy had been burning expensive candles, the kind that cost $40 each at department stores. The living room had been rearranged, my grandmother's antique chair moved to a corner and replaced with a modern leather recliner I didn't recognize. There were shopping bags scattered around, evidence of the spending spree she must have been on while planning her new life as a widow with inherited property. I walked through each room slowly, cataloging the changes. She had moved into the master bedroom, my bedroom, and spread her belongings across every surface. The guest room where she and Thomas had been staying was now being used as a massive closet, with clothes still bearing price tags hanging from every available hook and rod. In the kitchen, I found receipts scattered across the counter. She had been shopping for appliances, furniture, even a new car. Everything purchased on credit, probably with the assumption that she would soon own valuable real estate to use as collateral. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a receipt for a $7,000 dining room set, when I heard the front door slam. Bernice? Romy's voice echoed through the house, sharp with panic. Bernice, where are you? I didn't answer. I simply sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Thomas had done his homework as a child, and waited. She found me a few minutes later, breathing hard like she had been running. Her perfect makeup was smudged, and her hair was disheveled. She looked nothing like the composed woman who had taunted me in the park 2 weeks ago. We need to talk, she said, trying to catch her breath. Do we? This is crazy, Bernice. You can't just kick me out. I'm family. I looked at her for a long moment. When did you start considering yourself my family, Romy? Because it certainly wasn't when you were photographing me feeding pigeons and asking if I was having fun living with dogs. She had the grace to look ashamed, but only for a second. I was upset. I was grieving. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional, do they? I stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the backyard. Tell me, what exactly were you grieving? Because it seems to me that you saw Thomas's death as an opportunity rather than a loss. That's not fair, isn't it? I turned around to face her. You had me thrown out before Thomas was even buried. You were shopping for new furniture while I was sleeping on park benches. You were planning your new life as a property owner while I was digging through garbage cans for food. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might actually be feeling genuine remorse. I didn't know you were actually homeless. I thought you had somewhere to go. Where, Romy? Where did you think a 63-year-old woman with no money would go? I don't know. A hotel, a friend's house. How was I supposed to know you didn't have other options? Because you never asked. You never cared enough to ask. We stood there in silence for several minutes. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, The same clock that had marked time in this house for over 2 decades. Look, Romy said finally, her voice taking on a wheedling tone I remembered from whenever she wanted something. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but we're both adults here. We can work something out. What kind of something? I could pay you rent. I have a job interview next week. A good position with benefits. I could help you maintain the property. Maybe even help you manage your other investments. I almost laughed. You want to help me manage my investments? I have a business degree, Bernice. I know about finance and property management. We could be partners. Partners. I repeated the word like it tasted bad. Equal partners, I suppose. Well, not equal exactly, but fair. You provide the capital, I provide the expertise and the labor. And what makes you think I need your expertise? She gestured around the kitchen. Look at this place, Bernice. It's like a time capsule. You could be making so much more money from your properties if you updated them, modernized your approach. I could help you do that. I walked over to a drawer and pulled out a folder I had placed there earlier. You mean like this? I handed her a thick packet of papers. She opened it and began reading, her expression growing more confused with each page. These are renovation plans, she said, for the Riverside Shopping Plaza. I'm converting the upper level into luxury loft apartments. The project starts next month. I handed her another folder. This is the proposal for the Cherry Street duplex. I'm having it completely renovated and converted into a single-family home. The neighborhood has gentrified enough that it will triple in value. A third folder. Plans for the mountain cabin. I'm adding 2 bedrooms and modernizing the kitchen. The vacation rental market up there has exploded since COVID. She was staring at the papers like they were written in hieroglyphics. You already have all of this planned? Romy, I've been managing properties for over 20 years. I was buying and renovating real estate before you were out of high school. What exactly did you think I needed your help with? But Thomas said what you wanted to hear. Thomas told you I was helpless because that's what you expected to hear about a poor old widow. You never bothered to ask him about the details because you weren't interested in the truth. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, still holding the renovation plans. So what happens now? Now you pack your belongings and find somewhere else to live. You have 27 days left, and if I refuse, I sat down across from her. Then the sheriff will remove you forcibly, and you'll have an eviction on your record that will make it very difficult to rent anywhere decent. You would really do that to me? Romy, you threw me out of my own home and laughed at me while I was homeless. You photographed my humiliation and mocked me for sport. What exactly do you think I owe you? She was quiet for a long time, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her expression. Not remorse exactly, but a kind of calculating acceptance. What if I had information you might want to know? What kind of information? About Thomas. About things he said before he died. A chill ran down my spine. What things? She leaned forward, sensing an advantage. He knew, Bernice. He figured out that you were wealthy. He found some of your financial documents about 6 months ago. I felt my heart stop. That's impossible. Is it? Thomas was smarter than you gave him credit for. He started noticing things, the way you never seemed worried about money even when he lost his job, the way you always had cash available when he needed help, the quality of your jewelry even though you shopped at thrift stores. My mouth went dry. What did he say? He said he understood why you did it. He said he was grateful that you let him feel useful instead of like a charity case. But he also said, she paused, watching my face carefully. What? He said he was worried about what would happen to you if something happened to him. He was worried about me. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was worried about you hurting me? He said I had a mean streak. He said he hoped you would be smart enough to protect yourself if he wasn't around anymore. I stared at her, trying to process this information. If he knew I could protect myself, why was he worried? Romy's smile was cold and sharp. Because he also said you loved him so much that you might let someone hurt you if you thought it was what he would have wanted. The truth of it settled over me like a weight. Thomas had seen right through both of us. He had known exactly who I was and exactly who Romy was, and he had been trying to protect me from beyond the grave. Get out, I said quietly. Bernice, get out of my house. Now. She stood up slowly, still holding the renovation plans. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is that my son didn't live long enough to see what kind of person he married. After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen as the sun set outside. Thomas had known. He had known everything, and he had still been trying to take care of me right up until the end. For the first time since his death, I cried. Not just for losing him, but for the conversations we never had, for the truths we never shared, for the years we spent pretending to be something we weren't because we both thought we were protecting each other. But tomorrow, I would start living differently. Tomorrow I would start being honest about who I was. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of my mountain cabin, watching a group of rescue dogs play in the afternoon sunshine. The renovation had been completed ahead of schedule, and what had once been a simple vacation rental was now something entirely different. The Haven, as I had decided to call it, was a sanctuary for older dogs that shelters couldn't place. The ones that were too gray around the muzzle, too slow, too set in their ways for most families to want. The ones that reminded me a little too much of myself during those 2 weeks on the street. Maxine, a 13-year-old golden retriever with cloudy eyes and arthritic hips, lay beside me in the grass. She had been surrendered to a kill shelter when her family moved and decided she was too much trouble to take along. Now she spent her days napping in sunny spots and being hand-fed treats by the volunteers who helped me run the sanctuary. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had found my purpose in caring for the discarded and forgotten. The dogs didn't care that I was wealthy. They didn't want anything from me except basic kindness and a safe place to spend their remaining years. My phone buzzed with a text from my property manager. The Cherry Street renovation was nearly finished, and we already had 3 offers above asking price. The Riverside Shopping Plaza apartments had a waiting list. Even with the expenses of running the sanctuary, my net worth had increased significantly over the past 6 months. I heard a car coming up the gravel driveway and looked up to see Mrs. Chen from the library climbing out of her sedan. She had become an unexpected friend over the past few months, volunteering at the sanctuary on weekends and helping me establish a small library in the main house where visitors could sit and read while spending time with the dogs. "How are our guests today?" she asked, settling into the lawn chair beside me. "Happy," I said simply. "Content." She nodded, watching as an elderly beagle named Chester hobbled over to investigate a butterfly. "Any word from your daughter-in-law?" I hadn't heard from Romy since she moved out 3 weeks after the eviction notice. She had taken most of her belongings but left behind several expensive purchases she couldn't return. I had donated them all to charity. Nothing. I assume she found somewhere else to land. Do you ever regret it? Being so hard on her? I considered the question while watching Chester give up on the butterfly and find a sunny spot for a nap. I regret that Thomas never got to see this place. I regret that I waited so long to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. But no, I don't regret protecting myself from someone who saw my pain as entertainment. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. "You know, when I first met you at the library, I thought you were just another homeless person looking for a place to get warm." I was. But there was something different about you. The way you carried yourself, even when you were at your lowest point. You never lost your dignity. I came close, but you didn't, and that's what matters. A new volunteer arrived to help with the evening feeding, a young woman whose own grandmother had been abandoned by family after developing dementia. She had found us through word of mouth, looking for a way to channel her anger into something positive. As the sun began to set, I walked through the main house one more time, checking on the older dogs who preferred to sleep indoors. The building had been completely transformed from a simple cabin into a comfortable facility with multiple sleeping areas, a modern kitchen for preparing special diets, and a medical room where our veterinarian held weekly clinics. In the office, I kept a framed photo of Thomas on the desk. Not one of the formal portraits from his funeral, but a candid shot of him at age 12, grinning and holding a rescue puppy we had fostered for a few weeks. He had begged me to keep that puppy, and I had said no because I thought it was too much responsibility. Now I was surrounded by dogs who needed homes, and I realized that Thomas would have loved this place. He would have understood why I chose to spend my money this way instead of on designer clothes or luxury cars. My phone rang as I was turning off the lights. An unknown number, which usually meant either a donation inquiry or someone looking to surrender an animal. Hello? Mrs. Hartwell? This is Detective Morrison with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about Romy Thompson. My heart rate picked up. What about her? She's been arrested for credit card fraud and identity theft. We found documents with your name and social security number among her belongings. We'd like you to come in and file a formal complaint. I sat down heavily in my desk chair. What kind of documents? Falsified bank statements? Forged signatures on loan applications? That sort of thing. It looks like she's been using your information to try to secure credit. The applications were all denied because the credit bureaus couldn't verify the information, but attempted fraud is still a crime. I closed my eyes. How long has this been going on? Based on what we've found, it started about 2 months after she moved out of your property. Mrs. Hartwell, she also had photographs of you from when you were homeless. It appears she was using them to create a false narrative about your financial situation to support her fraud attempts. The photographs from the park, the humiliation she had documented for her own amusement, had become evidence in her scheme to steal my identity. Mrs. Hartwell, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. What do you need me to do? We'd like you to come in tomorrow morning to review the evidence and file a formal complaint. With your testimony, we can make sure she faces appropriate charges. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet office for a long time. Outside, I could hear the contented sounds of dogs settling in for the night, the rustle of bedding, the occasional soft snore. Romy had made one final attempt to profit from my misery, and it had backfired spectacularly. The very photographs she had taken to mock me would now serve as evidence of her criminal intent. I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago. So desperate for family that I had allowed myself to be abused and discarded. That woman might have felt sorry for Romy, might have declined to press charges out of some misguided sense of mercy, but I was not that woman anymore. The next morning, I drove into town and spent 2 hours at the sheriff's department, reviewing evidence and signing statements. The detective showed me loan applications where Romy had claimed to be my financial power of attorney, supported by the photographs of me looking homeless and confused. She told the loan officers that you had dementia and that she was responsible for managing your assets, Detective Morrison explained. She was trying to secure a credit line using your property as collateral. But she doesn't have any legal authority over my finances. No, she doesn't, which is why this constitutes fraud. She was banking on the assumption that a confused elderly woman with no family wouldn't be able to fight back effectively. I signed the final complaint form and handed it back to him. What happens now? Now she goes to trial. With the evidence we have, she's looking at several years in prison. As I drove back to the sanctuary, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not satisfaction or revenge, just a quiet sense that justice was being served. Romy had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. That evening, I sat on the porch of the main house with Maxine sleeping at my feet and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. The sanctuary was full. 12 dogs who might otherwise have been euthanized were now living out their days in comfort and dignity. My phone buzzed with a text from the contractor working on my next project. A second sanctuary facility on the other side of the state. We were breaking ground next month. I had spent most of my life hiding who I was, pretending to be smaller and weaker than I actually was, because I thought it would protect the relationships that mattered to me. But the relationship that had mattered most, the one with my son, had been strong enough to survive the truth. Thomas had loved me not because I needed him, but because I was his mother. The dogs at Haven didn't know I was wealthy, but they also didn't care that I had once been homeless. They loved me because I fed them, because I gave them warm places to sleep, because I treated them with kindness even when the world had given up on them. That was enough. That was everything. As the stars came out overhead, I made a mental note to add another photo to my office wall, not of Thomas this time, but of myself on that first day at the sanctuary, surrounded by dogs who had found their way home at last. Some legacies are about money or property or business empires passed down through generations. But the legacy I was building now was simpler and more lasting. A place where the forgotten could find peace, where the discarded could discover their worth, where love was given freely without expectation of return. It was exactly the life my son would have wanted for me, and exactly the life I had always been brave enough to live once I stopped being afraid of who I really was. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.